Hi, and welcome back to Pinky Boo Hauntings. I'll be your witchy host, Shy, and I'll be your guide to all things paranormal, weird, and spooky. So, now that I'm doing this one, I realize I probably should have done it back in May for Mermaid, but I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that when you think of mermaids, you think of the beach and the ocean, and of course, those things make most of us think of summertime. So, yeah. So that's why I decided to do this topic now that it's officially summer. Also, I guess it's obvious, but we're talking about mermaids today. I've always loved mermaids and wanted to be one when I was younger. Well, that as well as a vampire, a witch, and a magical girl. And probably some other things on top of that. I was a very ambitious child. And I also had untreated ADHD. So there was that too. I did grow up to be a witch, though, so at least one came true. Sadly, I can't fly a broom. But, oh well. Mermaids. Let's get back to the mermaids. Oh, wait. I did promise an update on the party. It went great. I, of course, was stressed for nothing, but I ended up getting everything done. And the cake was cute. It wasn't perfect, but it came out pretty much how I wanted, which, for someone that's never been a baker, is pretty good. I also shattered a bat trying to break the piñata. I put way too much faith in a toy bat. I swear I tested it and thought it could handle it, so that was my fault. Also, why are they building the piñata so sturdy now? If I had known that thing was made of thick cardboard, I would have found something else. But I just assumed a toy bat would be enough to break that thing. Other than that, everything went well, and I guess that's all you can ask for, right? Oh, also, if you saw my post on Threads about me getting hurt at work and losing my voice, I'm recovering. I'm sure you can hear it in my voice that it's still kind of a little frayed, but at least I can stand and walk now, even though it's still kind of sore and I can feel it once in a while. But other than that, I'm okay. All right, enough of the life updates. Let's get back to today's topic. Let's talk about mermaids. When you think of mermaids, I'm sure the first one to come to your mind is probably Ariel, or maybe even the ones from Peter Pan. Or maybe it's something different. But for most of us, we all probably have a very similar picture in our head. A beautiful woman with a long, flowy hair floating around her as she swims. And of course, she has a long fish like tail with shimmering scales that seem almost otherworldly. Add on top of that the unknowns of the ocean deeps. It's no wonder people see these creatures as magical and mysterious. It's also no wonder so many people dream of being one themselves. I was one of them after all, so I get it. Hell, if I was a stronger swimmer, I'd love to have one of those mermaid tails. Though I would also have to get a pool for that, sadly. But why do so many of us find a fascination with these creatures, even to the point that some learn how to swim with a mermaid tail and make a whole career out of it? The magic of mermaids is clearly an alluring one, and one we all seem to share in all over the world. So, what is a mermaid? The obvious answer is a mermaid is an aquatic creature that usually presents as a human woman on their top half and a fish like tail on their bottom half. There's a male equivalent that most call a mermaid, but to me, I don't know that that really matters. I understand mermaid is a combination of the words mer, which means sea, and maid, which is, of course, a shortening of maiden. So I understand it is supposed to represent just the female version of the creature, but please tell me I'm not the only one that calls all mer people mermaids. In the earliest known written origins of this word can be traced all the way back to 1390 in the Nun's Priest's Tale. But whether this is its true origin is still up in the air. But of course, this is just the English word, and maybe the most well known word to describe this mystical creature. I could be wrong about that though, so don't come for me if I am. But I think no matter where you're from, if you heard the word mermaid, you know exactly what we were talking about, right? But yes, everyone around the world seems to have their own word for this half human, half fish like being. At first, I wanted to list all of the different versions, but when I say everyone around the world has a different word for the same thing, I mean it. And I don't think you guys would have too much fun listening to me list off all of the different variants, especially since I'd be struggling through most of them, which I hate because it was so cool seeing just all of the different ways to not only say mermaid, but also how everyone describes them. But it was also just as cool seeing how we all pretty much do agree on what this thing looks like for the most part, and how we all seem to have pretty much the same words for it in just different languages. I think the strangest one I saw was the Japanese version, which I did kind of know about, but also totally forgot about, if that makes sense. It is known as a ningyo. I think I pronounced that right. And is classified as a yokai, which, if you didn't know, can be translated to monster, demon, spirit, or goblin. Though I think most think of it as demons, which is only one of the many things a yokai can be. Yokai encompass a large range of different things from Japanese lore. So no, that doesn't mean that the Ningyo is a demon or anything. What a Ningyo is described as, though, could make someone think it was a demon if they saw it. A Ningyo is described almost like every other mermaid, except for one glaring thing. This mermaid would probably not entice sailors to their doom, because it is said to have a human head on a fish body, which is probably the scariest version of a mermaid you can see. Because it's not even trying to hide that it's probably going to eat your face off. Even though I don't think it actually wants to do that. In fact, the only folklore I could find on it was about how it got its flesh eaten to help other people live long lives and stay young and beautiful. So, if anything, it's the victim, even if it looks like it would be the predator. Though, really, all mermaids could be seen as scary if you look into the lore of them, because they aren't just sweet, innocent humanoid creatures that live in the sea. They are darker in nature. While most see mermaids as a separate entity from sirens, they can be seen as the same, which means all we know about sirens can be applied to mermaids too. And it's not really that surprising because even if you see them as two different creatures, their folklore has a lot of similarities. Both are described as half human, half fish beings that lurk in the oceans and are said to be so beautiful that men easily fall in love with them. And if their beauty didn't lure sailors in alone, they are also said to have a haunting but lovely singing voice that will draw anyone in that hears it, usually to their doom, at least when it comes to the sirens. Where people don't agree is if mermaids are benevolent or not, because while their origins could have been influenced by the sirens of Greek mythology, people don't treat them as the same. And maybe there is a reason for that. Because if you didn't know, in the early Greek period, sirens were actually depicted as a humanoid bird like creature, not a fish. It wasn't until the Christian era that sirens became more mermaid like, making the two almost indistinguishable at that point. And to blur the lines between the two even more, let's get deep into the folklore of the mermaids. People might see sirens as the most dangerous of the two, but are they really? Because while some tales talk about how mermaids bestow blessings upon them, or how they fell in love with a human, other tales make them seem just as dangerous as a siren. Stories talk about how they are seen as an ominous omen. Seeing one could mean a storm is coming, a shipwreck would occur, or there had been a drowning. And while that doesn't mean they caused any of those, it still made a sighting a feared thing. But that isn't the only reason men would fear an encounter with a mermaid. And yes, I mean just men, because as you probably know, sirens and mermaids usually are only known to go after men. Whether that is because back then men were the only ones that sailed the seas, so it was their only prey, or if they just hated men is kind of up in the air. What we know for sure is that they did lure men to their doom, whatever the case. For a sailor, the best thing they could do was avoid coming in contact with a mermaid at all cost. Because while we know they were known to lure men in with their singing to their underwater grave, did you know you should also never take a gift from a mermaid? For it is said to bring misfortune. But if you didn't, that might offend the mermaid, and you couldn't do that either. For if you were to offend them, they could bring floods and other disasters your way. So, no matter what, you probably were bringing misfortune onto you and those around you, which is why the best thing was to stay away from the mermaids. So, while nowadays a lot of people would love to see one, back then they were seen less as a wonderful and magical creature and more like a monstrous being to be feared. Mermaids were also said to entice young people into living with them underwater, something I think a lot of us now would jump on so fast. But of course, that was just one more reason to fear them for those in the past. Because for those folks, the mermaids were stealing their children, and what parent wouldn't fear a being taking their kids from them? Now, after saying all of that about how they could be seen as darker in nature, let's talk about European folklore that might change your mind once again on them. European stories of mermaids describe them as beings with very long lives. Though while they do live a long life, they are still mortal. They are just said to not have a soul of their own. And of course, they love music and often sing. I assume that is just them wanting to sing and not using their voice to draw men into the water. European folklore also talk of them being beings with magical and prophetic powers, a lot like fairies are in their folklore. Maybe those powers is why stories tell of men forcing mermaids into marrying them. I know, we're all surprised to find out a man saw a magical, beautiful creature and said, I'm going to force her to be with me and keep her to myself. But how did they do this? Folk tales say that the way to force a mermaid into marriage was to steal an object from them. The usual objects were things like a belt, a cap, a comb, or a mirror. Taking these objects would hold her hostage. Because what says a loving, healthy marriage better than stealing something from your wife to force her to stay with you? The sad part is, I could absolutely see a guy doing this. Sadly, as long as the object is hidden from her, she was trapped and had to stay with this man. That being said, if she were to find it, she was free to run as far away from that gross man as possible, hopefully bringing a flood his way afterwards. There is a less creepy version of this, though. Some variants, the marriage gives the mermaid more agency within it. Instead of having an object stolen from her and being held hostage, she only stays in the marriage as long as the agreed upon terms are met. If they are ever broken, she ends the marriage and leaves the man in the dust. Which, if you have to be in a loveless marriage, at least it's not against your will. And if the conditions aren't being fulfilled, you can leave. It's definitely a less gross option between the two. And now you see why I was wondering before if they just went after men because they were just the only things around, or if they were targeting them. Because if I was a mystical creature that could lure men to their deaths with my voice and change the ties at my will, I'd be tempted to do so if I found out my friends and family were getting kidnapped and forced into marriage against their will. Maybe mermaids were just misunderstood and were just trying to fight back in the best way they could. One thing that was strange about looking into this is while stories change slightly, most legends of mermaids have similar elements all around the world, which is why I didn't want to go into all of the different countries. So, while it's easy to brush all of this off as just simple folklore, is it really? Back when most of these stories were written or told, travel was a lot harder and information was even harder to get from town to town, let alone from country to country. So, how does the whole world seem to agree, for the most part, on what a mermaid is? Because while they could be golden, like in the Southeast Asian stories, a fish with a human head, or just your basic half human, half fish creature, they all share similar stories and looks. Whether it's luring men to their death, being a bad omen, having magical powers, or even marrying a man against their will or on their own terms, we all seem to have a fascination with these underwater entities. So, with us all, for the most part, having a similar image of what a mermaid is, would it be that unbelievable to think they could be real? Even to this day, people claim to have seen a mermaid in freshwater and in the ocean. People that make their living on the ocean have said they've seen one. So, are these people just seeing things, or could they have really saw a mermaid? Why don't we hear from some people that do believe they have seen a mermaid? I found these stories on Reddit because I wanted to read some stories that aren't just folklore or stories that were from 100 years ago. I wanted stories from this century. So why don't we start with, believe it or not, but my aunt swears she has seen a mermaid when she was young. She always tells a story, and I would like to share it with you. Judging by the way she tells it, it seems like it really happened, and she really believes it was not a hallucination. She was on a boat with a friend when she was like 25 years old. She was looking at the sea when she saw a woman swimming. She was pale white, with a long, straight black hair. And my aunt knows it was impossible for someone to swim there because it was very deep water. At some point, that woman looked at her and smiled. Her eyes were black, and her teeth were pointy, like those of a shark. My aunt was obviously frozen. Alright, well, I think it's not that unbelievable for someone to be swimming in very deep water. I'd assume you'd see a boat nearby or something, because that would be very dangerous to be out that far without someone nearby on a boat, just in case. Her looks, on the other hand, pale white and black hair isn't really that weird, but her eyes and teeth. How close was your aunt to be able to see that her eyes were black and that she had pointy teeth? At least she seemed friendly despite having shark teeth. Could have been worse. She could have wanted to eat your aunt's face off, which does once again make me wonder, do mermaids and sirens just target men? Or did that mermaid just realize your aunt was chills, so she wanted to be nice? To, like, ease your aunt's mind. Not that that worked, clearly. Oh, right. She was with friends. Did they see the mermaid too? Or did she even ask them if they did? Because I could see her being worried to say anything. So, this next story was in a subreddit called People Sailors of Reddit who have seen a mermaid or are just convinced they exist. Can you please tell us what they look like or why you are sure they exist? This might not be the kind of story you expect, but hear me out. I believe mermaids exist as members of the fae or fairy world. Hey, that's kind of how European folklore saw them. Well, maybe not exactly, because they didn't see them as fae, but they are said to have the same kind of powers as the fae, so kind of the same. I believe they can connect with people and, like in my case, even become their guides. I believe I have a mermaid guide who gives me interesting information and helps me make decisions. I won't be sharing any specific stories because they might be identifying. As for what they look like, my guide looks like what you would expect for a merman. He's got sinewy human arms and a lean human chest. He's blonde and blue eyes, with average length hair, very human from the waist up. Below that is a blue aquatic mammal tail. Fishtail is generally a misnomer. Fishtails swing side to side, but mammal tails swing up and down. Therefore, most of the mermaids you've seen in movies and fiction have mammal tails. You know what? I never thought about it. What if mermaids aren't from our world, but can travel to our world? Kind of like how some people believe Bigfoot is a being that can travel between dimensions, and that's why they are pretty rare to come across. Mermaids seem to have powers of some kind, so why can't they have the ability to move between worlds? Also, guides can be anything, so I'm not surprised you have a mermaid for a guide. Pretty cool you do, though. And it might sound weird for me to say this, but he seems nice. I know there isn't much info on him as far as his character, but I just get the feeling he's kind and caring. And no, not all guides are like that. They are there to help you in your life, but that doesn't mean they all have the same kind of personality. They're just like people. They all have their own ways of working with you, talking to you, and treating you. One of my guides like to talk to me like an exhausted mom that's dealing with their feral child all the time. And honestly, I don't blame them. I'm kind of a stubborn asshole. So they kind of have to treat me that way because I don't listen. They're also the one that likes to keep me in check a lot. But again, I don't like to listen. I am by nature rebellious. I'm sorry. Anyways, why don't we move on to our last story? Siren mermaid sightings. My brother doesn't actually remember this now, but back when we were kids, he's 3 years younger than me. We were on a trip with our grandparents at a condo timeshare in Florida. An important thing to note at this point was that this was before we knew I needed glasses. So I could very much not see further than like a foot in front of my face, and that was normal for me. I get that. I've had glasses since I was 6, but I hated them. So I fought against wearing them, and I swear I don't remember feeling like I needed them or that my eyes were that bad. I'm nearsighted and legally blind without my glasses. So yeah, it's not that crazy to me that you thought it was normal. Once you get those glasses though, that's when you go, "Holy shit, I'm blind." We were on one of those little concrete bridges over the tunnels with the runoff streams that flow down to the beach. You know what I mean? And it had actually made a pretty big, deep pool right below the bridge. It was all murky and brown and stuff. Sounds gross, and yet I'm sure someone has tried to play in it. We were messing around on the bridge, and my brother leans over to look down into the runoff pool, and he just freezes. I ask him what's wrong, and he's like, "You didn't see her?" And I was like, "See what?" And he swears to me up and down that there was a mermaid in the runoff pool. He described her as looking a couple of years older than me. I was 11 to 12, I think, so 13 to 14, possibly 15, with, he thinks, light brown hair, and her skin looked light blue. Her tail was about the same length as the rest of her body, so not super long like a live action Little Mermaid, with big scales, more like dragons than an actual fish's, like sticking out, layered on top of each other, like chainmail, kinda. I don't know how to describe it. Small fins running down the side, and very small, horizontally aligned tail fins. The most basic sort of V shape you can see on a fish, with eye spots on each of the lobes, like a tropical fish. Maybe it's just me, because I don't know much about fishes, but I don't understand what lobes are on one. I know what an earlobe is, but I've never heard of a lobe on a fish. She does sound like she has a crazy mermaid tail, though, and would have been probably wild to see. Well, seeing a whole mermaid would be wild on its own, but you know what I mean. He said she was wearing a top, kind of like a sweater, that looked like it was woven out of kelp or whatever the seaweed with the little AirPod bobbles is, with 3/4 sleeves, with the buoyancy pods still dangling off of it. He said she was maybe like a foot below the surface of the pool, but he only saw her for like a second before she saw us, looked scared for a second, and sank back down. And since the water was so dirty, he couldn't see her anymore. Again, I don't know what seaweed they're talking about because I don't know much about that kind of stuff. But it is kind of crazy that she was wearing a sweater like shirt because I feel like that would drag you down when swimming. But then again, maybe she didn't care or just wanted to look cute. And that's valid. Why I believe him about this particular anecdote is because one, he was a very good, rule abiding kid back in those days and was also awkward, anxious, and an absolutely horrible liar. He cried just imagining getting in trouble or making people mad, and he seemed genuinely shocked and swore to me that he'd seen her until he was practically in tears. And two, the mermaid he described was so far out of the typical kid friendly media mermaid mold, but also not. Like, completely monstrous, like the Goblet of Fire ones. I don't know how to explain it, but it was a very grounded mermaid description, almost boring in a way, and very much not what I'd want to hear. I mean, if he was just going to make something up to entertain me, I was enormously into mermaid melody, pitchy pitchy pitch at the time. So he could have just described one of those types of mermaids with a frilly tail fin and the armband bracelets and all of that. Or gone classic Ariel or Barbie Mermaidia style, because that's the type of mermaid he knew I'd have wanted to see. And believe me, at the time, he very much did not have the foresight, whatever, to try and make his lies seem more grounded, to make them more convincing. He wasn't dumb, at least not in pure IQ sense, but boy howdy, was he just the awkwardest, most neurotic little alien changeling of a kid back then. Maybe it's 'cause I don't understand fish anatomy, but I thought she sounded cool. Yeah, she definitely wasn't your traditional mermaid, it seemed, but I wouldn't say she was boring. But again, I didn't know what half of those words meant, at least when it comes to fishes. So maybe I'm picturing the mermaid all wrong. Dragon scaled tail does sound awesome though. So guys, have you seen a mermaid before? Do you believe they're even real? What about theories? Do you have any on what mermaids are or why they're rare to see? They clearly are, because I couldn't find too many stories of sightings or encounters. But if you do find yourself face to face with one, try to be respectful and maybe don't take their stuff. Don't keep a mermaid hostage, because that's just not cool. Really, just don't do that with anyone. Keeping people against their will should just not be something you should be doing, like at all. Now, let's very smoothly and not at all awkwardly move on to the part of the episode where I ask you guys if you enjoyed, well, the episode. Because if you did, please consider rating and reviewing or liking and subscribing on YouTube. It, of course, helps the podcast grow. What else helps us grow is sharing the coven with others. The more the word gets out, the more of us that can come together and talk about the weird and spooky, which of course is what I want, and I hope you want as well, especially if you've stuck around this long. Also, with more of us gathering together, the more stories we can listen to. And speaking of stories, if you have a story of a mermaid sighting, let me know. I'd love to hear all about them because I know there are probably a lot more stories out there. Maybe you have encountered one and have been too scared to tell anyone because you don't want to sound crazy. Well, guess what? We don't think you're crazy and we'll listen to your tale. So if you have a story you'd like to share, send them my way and I'll read them on here. And I'm sure you're wondering where you can send your mermaid stories, or really any of your paranormal stories, right? Well, you can send them to our email, pinkyboohauntings@gmail. The email will also be in the show notes in the description below. But for now, the coven is adjourned. See you next time. Bye.